Hi, I'm Jim from the Old Warlock.
I'm Alex.
And today we wanted to talk about the importance of well thought out non-player characters.
We did.
Since I started playing the game a long time ago, one of the things I recognized early on was that even though you're never going to fully develop every non-player character that you have, because it's, for one thing, the time spent on doing that would be
astronomical,
and not worth doing beyond a certain point. But one of the things I found, like I said, was that developing one or two what I call anchor NPCs can make a huge difference in an adventure or in the lives of player characters. And so we thought that one of the things we would do is give you an example, or a couple of the things we would do is give you some examples of some of the non-player characters that have been in my world over the years that have played a major role, I think, in the development of the characters and also just in the direction adventures have taken.
Yeah.
And in the amount of fun that you can have, not just for the players, but also for the dungeon master.
Yeah. So let's just go through some stories of characters that he's created for me and for, at one point, our videographer in our adventures through his Dungeons & Dragons world. First and foremost, when we just had originally started playing, and I was about 12, I think, when I was finally allowed to start playing Dungeons & Dragons, and I created my first character, who is still alive today. My brother and I came across a character named Landis, who was stuck under a tree in the pouring, torrential rain that we were trying to make our way through.
And Landis is a pixie.
He is. And so he was stuck under a tree. And so me and our companions went over and lifted this tree off of him and pulled him out. And he was just so thankful that we had managed to do this. But it turned out that Landis the pixie was one of the greatest cooks in the region and could make phenomenal food out of anything that was presented to him anytime that he wanted to. And so me and my brother, taking this initiative and this inspiration that was given to us, decided to start up our own food cart. It's like a food truck, basically, but with, horses that we took around, and we just sold food at festivals using the talents of Landis the pixie.
And it was great because as being Dad, the dungeon master, one of the things that when they first started playing, one of the things I didn't want to do was be telling them what they needed to go and accomplish, which direction they needed to go, what they needed to look out for. But I needed a vehicle to still be able to do that as I was teaching them the game. Well, putting Landis into the game allowed Landis to give them assistance when it was needed to accomplish certain things or to understand how to figure out certain traps or to overcome certain situations. And so that was Landis's big function. But then they eventually took Landis and his abilities and turned them into, like you say, the food truck item. But then there were adventures that came off of that, trying to find ways to fund the food truck, trying to find ways to obtain spices and meats and foods that Landis could then work with to create this cuisine that he was so famous for.
Yeah.
And then Landis became more and more deeply connected with you guys, and then that allowed for other adventures because, in fact, at one point there were people who tried to kidnap Landis because they wanted to have access to his abilities with food, which created more opportunities for other adventures that they could go on to either save Landis or recapture Landis, et cetera, et cetera. So I think Landis was one of the first very important anchor non-player characters that you guys had that really helped guide you in your development in D&D.
Yeah, with those characters. He's enormously important because, like he said, he was able to guide us through what we should be doing when we didn't have any idea of how to play the game. And so we were just able to learn by proxy of Landis through him kind of nudging us in the right direction whenever we needed to.
And as a DM, like I said, it gave me the opportunity to become more integrally involved with playing.
Yeah.
As opposed to just a random non-player character, I had to actually think up, really strong backstory for Landis that they could relate to. But it gave me a chance to be creative within the story in a more direct way with you as a player, as opposed to a dungeon master player relationship.
Yeah. And then along the same route, in one of these adventures, while we were trying to find things for Landis or find funding for Landis, because it eventually led to the construction of a tavern at a crossroads and things like that. And so we always had to kind of go out on adventures to find funding or new things that we would be able to use. And while we were going through a dungeon on one of these adventures, we came across a kitchen in one of these dungeons. We thought, kitchens are fun. There could be things that are in here, cookbooks or something like that we could use. And so we searched through the kitchen, we opened up the ovens, and we're looking on shelves and things like that. But little did we know, after we opened up one of the ovens and closed it again, it activated a spell. So we didn't see anything inside, and we went on our way. But as we kept making our way through the dungeon, we were hearing noises back from the kitchen that we had just looked through. So, that's weird. So we went back and kind of looked around, and we started hearing voices, or a voice coming from the inside of this oven. We opened up the oven, and a gingerbread man came walking out and started talking to us. And his name was Sparky. Sparky the gingerbread man. And ever since we rescued Sparky from this oven, and of course we picked him up and talked to him and became great friends with him. He always rides around on one of our shoulders whenever we go places. We've bought him different materials. He has a needle of backstabbing, so I think he's technically a thief acrobat. Yeah. And so in battle he'll just disappear. We won't know where he went, but every once in a while there'll just be this eruption of screaming from something we're fighting because he's sneaked up behind them and used this magical needle to inflict huge amounts of damage on these things that we're fighting. We made him a tiny set of bagpipes. He has his own armor, and we gave him a ring of swimming so he doesn't dissolve if he ever hits the water.
So based on what you've heard, you might be thinking that my campaign is a lot of fluff. I mean, we've had a pixie, we've got a gingerbread man, but it's really not fluff at all. But I just think that it's a good idea every now and then to throw a character in that has a unique history. A lot of the stuff that I end up doing in my spare time, being the geek that I am, is I run through in my head why things might be a certain way, and character development is one of those things that I spend a lot of off time doing. The story behind Sparky is that there was a magic user in my campaign that, of course, the player characters never met. But he specialized in food magic. I like to investigate different ways of magic being used. The food magician might sound a little bit corny, but when you think about it, if a magician has control over what goes into food and can make that food affect people in different ways, that's actually a really powerful type of magic. Because you can have it negatively affect people, you can have food positively affect people. Anything that somebody ingests could end up being of use to a variety of different people.
Yeah.
Anyway, this particular food magician, he was very good at what he did, and he was kidnapped by a somewhat evil man, shall we say. And he was held as a captive and forced to produce food magic so that this evil individual could use that food to manipulate local governments. He could end up killing people. He could assassinate people, not just by poison, but having them do things that might have gotten them killed in a way that wasn't obviously related to someone else doing something to them. So they might have committed suicide because of the food magic. A lot of different ways that it was being used. Well, the food magician was an elderly man by the time that he was kidnapped, and he became very lonely. He was living in a dungeon with this. All he was surrounded with was all these cooking items for 3 years. Finally decided that he needed to have some companions, so he used the food magic to create a dozen gingerbread men and women that he could communicate with, that could help him around the kitchen and things like that. Well, every time I've worked, and this came to me as I was making a gingerbread house at one Christmas, I always end up having an extra amount of dough for when I make these gingerbread houses. There's always that extra bit that just isn't needed, and I end up casting it anyway because I hate to throw things like that away. Well, I got to thinking, what would you do if you were making gingerbread men and you had that extra dough? You would make instead of making a dozen gingerbread men and women, you would make a 13th one. Then what happened in this particular scenario in my mind, once these 13 gingerbread men and women had been created, the old man used them not only to help him around the kitchen, but he also used them to help him escape. Problem was, he forgot about that 13th gingerbread man and left him in the oven, and he stayed there for 100 and some odd years, well over a century, until Alexander and his brother as characters came in and managed to free him from said oven. But by that time, the old man who created him and Sparky's 12 brothers and sisters were long gone, which then leads to a whole nother series of adventure possibilities. Alexander has voiced an interest in going and finding the other 12 gingerbread men and women who are Sparky's brothers and sisters. maybe he wants to track down what happened to the food wizard. But just having this non-player character come about in kind of a quirky way ended up really opening up a lot of interesting doors. And again, as we mentioned, having Sparky around also gives me the chance to be creative from within the game, not just creative from the exterior of the game. And to me, he's one of the more successful non-player characters that you guys have ever encountered.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. He adds a good dynamic. He's still very powerful and can contribute directly to what's going on, but he just makes things more interesting and more entertaining and adds like a little bit of comic relief if you want to have that aspect part of your campaign. It's great.
And Sparky can be a very serious character. I mean, he's very troubled by the loss of his brothers and sisters and how he came into being and why he was forgotten. But at the same time, he can actually create some really funny situations that add memorable moments to the campaign that we talk about years after, because it's been years since Sparky came into being.
First created, yeah.
Anyway, there are those two that you have known about. There's one other that I developed years ago. One thing I like to do with a lot of the NPCs that I create is keep bringing them back. Not every year, but maybe every other year. Evidence of a particular NPC that came along at an earlier adventure makes another appearance. And sometimes that's fun to have characters go, wait a minute, I've got a feeling that what we're seeing around here, it's very similar to what happened. I've read legends about this kind of thing happening years ago, but there's a legitimate reason for them getting that feeling, because I'm bringing forward NPCs that I might have developed 15 years ago that are still having some sort of an impact on what's going on in the current campaign situation.
Yeah.
One of those is a character I developed named Lavtill the Insane. The way I came up with Lavtill was that there was an adventure that took place where a number of player characters went into a dungeon. They hired a local wizard to assist them. And when they were down in the dungeon, after a battle, the wizard was knocked unconscious. They thought he was dead. He was taken down to 0 hit points, went unconscious. The player characters thought that he was dead, and they left him behind. They left his body behind because they were afraid they were going to get attacked again. And one afternoon I was thinking, what would it have been like for that wizard to have woken up after this battle where he'd been knocked unconscious and he's completely in the dark and has no way to find his way around or light anything up to help him find his way. And I realized that he would probably have crawled around in the dark for possibly months trying to find his way out by feeling the walls and trying to remember how he got down to where he was. And the more I thought about this poor person's plight, the more I realized he might have even gone insane as he tried to make his way out of this terrifying darkness to get back to the surface. And so playing upon that, I developed this character into a wizard who became more and more powerful, because as he made his way through the dungeon, he actually encountered some things, some magical items there that raised his abilities as a wizard. But at the same time, he lost his mind, or a lot of his mind. When he finally got out, it was a great thing to be able to take Lavtill and insert him into the campaign as a powerful force for evil. And he's been coming back to haunt player characters, not the same player characters, but he's been coming back to haunt player characters in my campaign ever since. So those are the kinds of non-player characters that we have in the campaign here that I think are actually quite valuable. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure a lot of you have similar non-player characters that you've given a lot of development to, but it's a good thing, I think, to have. Again, like we said, you can't have every non-player character that well developed, but having them occasionally well developed can really make a big difference in your game.
Yeah, it makes it feel more real as you're able to form relationships with these different characters, good or bad, that you have to encounter repeatedly. So the more fleshed out and the more realistic they can be, the more engrossed you get and the more involved and determined to accomplish things that you get as you're going through your game.
Well, and it's interesting to me as the Dungeon Master, because I have seen not just you, but Bill, Billy, Calvin, some of the other players that we have, they've been willing to have their long-term player characters die in order to help protect non-player characters. And when you reach that stage in the game where you're willing to give up a player that you've been a player character that you've been running for 2, 3 years, 5 years even, if you're willing to give that up for a non-player character, then you're doing, and you have that in your game, you know you're doing something right as a dungeon master when you've managed to get your character, your players, to develop that kind of a relationship with the non-player characters. And that's a cool feeling.
Yeah, it is. So we encourage you to try and do this. Try and flesh out NPCs and sidekicks and people like that a little bit more, just to add a little bit more flavor and involvement into what's going on in your world.
And if you have a favorite non-player character that you put together, I call them anchor NPCs, so to kind of differentiate them from your run-of-the-mill NPC. If you've got any stories on those type of non-player characters you've developed, let us know.
Absolutely.
We'd be more than happy to have them sent to us, because it might give us some ideas of things that we can integrate into our campaign. I love hearing other people's creative ideas, so let us know.
Yeah. Be sure to check out the links in the description. We have new clothes and other things available with the Old Warlock logo. Keep your sword arm free down below. If you like what we're doing and want to support, check out the coffee link down below. For $2 a one-time payment to contribute to the channel, you can get access to a bunch of maps that we've made exclusive to contributors on our website that you can take out and do whatever you want to with.
As long as you don't use them for commercial purposes, we don't care what you do.
Yeah, but you know what? If you also just stopped by, this kid was a suggested thing, you just watched the video, hey, thanks for watching.
We're glad you're here.
We appreciate it.
Anyway, I'm Jim.
I'm Alex.
Keep your sword on free.
Bye.